Hello, everybody. My name is Ray. Welcome to the Evangelical Dark Web. Today, we're going to be talking about Mark Driscoll getting uncanceled from Amazon. And this is probably the biggest story in evangelical circles that happened over the July 4th holiday. Uh, it's a very interesting springboard that I'm going to use because I've been wanting to talk about Mark Driscoll for a while. I've been doing research on Mark Driscoll to see if the Mark Driscoll comeback is a real phenomenon. And part of that research is watching his sermon series on Elijah. So I'm going to talk about that in a second. But my thoughts on Mark Driscoll as a discernment blogger, I've been doing this for like 3 years now. I know Mark Driscoll doesn't like discernment bloggers, but my thoughts on Mark Driscoll have definitely changed over time. You can see my video or my live stream with Joel Webbin, and we talked about Mark Driscoll in depth a little bit more there. But we're going to discuss this news story with Mark Driscoll. But first, I want to let you know, Evangelical Dark Web is a Christian news gathering and commentary ministry. You can support us over at evangelicaldarkweb.org/join. That's our Patreon-like system that you can support us at. Also, we have a free Evangelical Dark Web newsletter that you can sign up for, and that gives you Christian news in your inbox each and every day. There are more news articles than there are videos or podcasts, so that's why you want to sign up for that. That's more free content, and you get additional content if you're a paid subscriber. But the least you can do is like this video, subscribe to the channel or podcast if you are new. That's the least you can do. Anyway, so Mark Driscoll got canceled and then uncanceled from Amazon, and this is the story. They got contacted by Amazon saying, hello, we're contacting you regarding your, one of the books that you wrote. It's the new books that he wrote. It's based on his Elijah series that he's been, preaching on for months now. I'm not sure whether the sermon series is over yet, but I am watching it. I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. And Amazon sent him a letter basically saying, hey, your content violates our TOS. We don't allow this type of content on our platform. And then he got the correction notice following some sort of appeal, or they corrected. The Amazon content review team sent a follow-up email saying the following books you recently submitted has been reviewed and were successfully approved. New Days, Old Demons is the name of the book by Mark Driscoll. We incorrectly blocked your book and apologize for the inconvenience this might have caused. This book will soon be published on Amazon. Please allow for up to 48 hours for the book to be, I guess, restored. It's a little cut off on the side here. So anyway, that was the announcement. We're going to play the video that Mark Driscoll did, kind of explaining the context for the sermon series, which he has turned into a book, which is not unethical unless you think John MacArthur's unethical for doing a lot of the same things. But I have no issues with that whatsoever. And who knows, maybe his church is going to AstroTurf this one, which I don't think is wholly unethical either. But in any case, this is the video announcement that gives sort of a summation of the sermon series in question and the book, which we'll talk about more in a second.
Canceled, and then Shazam, Happy July 4th, Cowabunga, Uncanceled, New Days, Old Demons, brand new book out. It talks about the demonic forces that are at work in our world. It's the same demonic forces that were at work in the days of the Old Testament prophet Elijah, the Jezebel spirit that is controlling, sensual, sexual, castrates men, the Ahab spirit that is passive, tolerant, and allows evil to happen. These are the same demonic forces that have overtaken our economy, our culture, entertainment, government, of course, education, and even the woke, progressive rainbow churches, where nothing more than ancient paganism is presented as Christian faithfulness. The book was canceled. It is now available. Thank you, Amazon, for doing the right thing and bringing it back from the dead. And thank you to all my friends online who made a little noise and helped us get it done.
So that's a summary of what the book is about. It's also the thesis for what his sermon series was about. And I got to say, I have not finished the sermon series, but I've done research on Mark Driscoll to see, hey, is this comeback a real thing? Have I given him a bad rap as a discernment blogger? And I think the answer is yes. I think to both of those questions. I don't think that Mark Driscoll's a false teacher. I think the reasons that you would have for that are theological, but not on primary issues. Like, for instance, if you're a cessationist, you'll probably have issues with Mark Driscoll's teachings. Mark Driscoll is vehemently anti-cessationist, which, it is what it is, but that's not a primary issue. I think that's one of the hardest theological categories to really weigh in for your own self, is the continuation or cessation of spiritual gifts. So, and the second sermon on his sermon series on Elijah, I believe he goes on a little segment against cessationism, which, again, sermons and hot takes, I'm fine with that. I listen to Joel Webbin, and he does hot takes on postmillennialism and theonomy all the time. I am neither of those things, but I don't mind listening to pastors that I don't agree with 100%. So, but it's better that they're open about what their theology is. So I appreciate that. And I don't mind listening to people who I disagree with on some issues. So anyway, Mark Driscoll, vehemently anti-cessationist. And he's also, people have some questions about his church polity. I don't think that church polity is a standard at which you can declare someone a false teacher. That, again, is probably on the tertiary level issues, or maybe secondary. I would define a secondary issue as an issue you can leave a church over. A primary issue is someone who's outside the faith, or not outside the faith, inside the faith, outside the faith. A secondary issue is something that can separate a church, a distinctive between a denomination. Those are secondary issues in my mind. And then a tertiary issue is something that shouldn't separate a church, like eschatology should not separate a church. That's a tertiary issue. So that's a little lesson on the theological triage that I employ at Evangelical Dark Web. I try to make the standard very clear on who is and who isn't a false teacher, and we have transparent standards on these things. So the theological triage is one of those, or the hierarchy, I believe is what I call it. Other people call it a triage. It's all the same. But Mark Driscoll, those are the two things that most people who have an issue with Mark Driscoll would actually have an issue with, that are in the faith. The people outside of the faith, like the people who made the rise and fall of Mark Driscoll, they are feminists, they are Branch Covidians, they are theological liberals. That podcast series was put out by Christianity Today. It was put out by heretics. So, major red flag on the credibility of that. It's the same thing as the Shiny Happy People documentary, which Amazon put out, which was really a documentary trying to target. It was trying to bait you in with the Duggars family, and then it was switching you over to, we're going to target biblical patriarchy and homeschooling and Christian subculture. So that's kind of what the Mars Hill podcast was. And again, I don't think these are, I think Mark Driscoll got caught up in megachurch Christianity, made some mistakes, and he left the church that he was at. He left Mars Hill and then decided to part ways with them. And he was free to do that. He wasn't under church discipline. He left, you could say that he left so he wouldn't be under church discipline, but he had the right to do that. He has the right to do that. But anyway, I think that was several years ago. But if you look at who Mark Driscoll is now, he is a pastor that's making a lot of bold stands. Within his sermon series on Elijah, there are several viral clips from that are all completely based. And it's very interesting to see. It's like he's making bold statements that a lot of other pastors you wish that have theology you might agree with more should be making. And his application of Elijah and the story of Elijah, how it relates to us today, how it relates to Christ, is spot on. I think the sermon series is actually excellent so far. The first sermon was an absolute banger. And then the sermon, I believe it was a sermon I most recently watched. This was the sermon that went viral because he talked about Elijah mocking false prophets, which I've seen some anti-Christian nationalist folks say that Elijah didn't mock anybody. That's his misinterpretation. And they're trying to, say that mocking people isn't cool and all that, even though Elijah completely mocks the false prophets. This is an argument that Mark Driscoll makes, but it's also an argument that I made in my forthcoming book, which was published before I watched this sermon series, by the way. So I didn't get it from Mark Driscoll. It's just clearly in the text that Elijah says that, is your God taking a dump? That's in the text. So, that sermon, which is the two sermons that exceeded 100,000 views on the Real Faith, the YouTube channel that Mark Driscoll has, those sermons are excellent. Those two sermons in particular. But I think a lot of the points that he makes are really good. I don't think that Mark Driscoll is a false teacher, and it sounds like the Mark Driscoll comeback is indeed real. And again, Mark Driscoll might have a checkered past, but so do pretty much all of the early church fathers. They all have checkered histories. Martin Luther has a checkered history. Even fellow discernment bloggers have some checkered histories. But people change, people can repent, and it happens. So what you see with Mark Driscoll is someone who's on the right side of all of today's issues, not yesterday's issues, not someone saying, hey, I cling to the 7 ecumenical councils, but I somehow have these new ideas on gender and sexuality. Not someone like that. Someone who's right on today's issues. That's who Mark Driscoll is. Like him or not. So anyway, those are kind of my thoughts on Mark Driscoll. I think the story of him getting uncanceled on Amazon is a good thing. And again, I don't really care if he wants to AstroTurf his book or not. That's neither here nor there. But anyway, those are just my thoughts. Comment below what you think about what I think, and we'll catch you on the next one.